Hey guys, tonight we step into the dusty, sun-warmed streets of Ephesus, a city humming with life, chatter, and the occasional braying donkey. You trudge over uneven cobblestones, feeling the warmth of the sun on your neck and the faint tang of the Aegean in the breeze. Merchants call out their wares, jars of olive oil, figs, fabrics dyed in colors so vibrant you'd swear the pigments were stolen from the sunset itself. And right in the middle of all this ordinary bustle, a grand idea begins to take shape. The Library of Celsus. You probably won't survive this if you expect a straight-up textbook history. There's too much dust, gossip, and the weirdly satisfying creak of timber scaffolds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments, because somehow imagining Ephesus is even better when you're nestled in your own time zone. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You weave between stalls, ducking under low-hung awnings, hearing the metallic clang of tools from a distant construction site. A new building is rising, or rather, a dream is, the future site of the Library of Celsus. Historians still argue whether the library was intended primarily as a repository of knowledge or more as a monumental tomb for Julius Celsus himself. You brush past women carrying amphorae, the smell of fresh bread mingling with the earthy scent of wet clay, and feel a faint thrill. Imagine the senators discussing the plans in shadowed porticos, quills poised over wax tablets. Meanwhile, curious children dart between your legs, and you almost step on a stray chicken before it squawks indignantly and flees. Everywhere, life pulses. A vendor drops a jar, it shatters, sending a small flock of pigeons skyward. You pause to admire the randomness of it all, tiny glimpses of what daily life was like around 110 CE. A street musician strums a lyre out of tune, and a cart rattles past, laden with marble blocks so pristine you momentarily forget the dust in your hair. Even these mundane moments, oddly, make the looming library feel more alive. Remember that creeping sense of awe when you first realized humans could carve perfection from stone? That's exactly what's happening here, except with the added thrill of you trudging through centuries to witness it. Builders argue quietly in a shaded corner. One insists on moving the foundations slightly north. Another mutters about drainage. You notice an artisan using crocodile udang sunscreen on his hands. Somehow it's both revolting and fascinating. You squint at the sun glinting off unfinished columns, wondering how anyone could imagine a structure that would last for centuries. The air vibrates with anticipation, and even as you take a deep breath, tasting the dust and salt, you realize you are standing on the edge of history in the making. Every step, every sound, every whiff of roasting lamb from a nearby stall is stitched into this moment. And as your eyes wander up to the skeletal outlines of walls soon to be adorned with marble, you can't help but imagine the debates echoing among planners. Should the library face east or west? Will the scrolls be catalogued alphabetically or by subject? Historians still argue about these seemingly minor decisions, but they mattered profoundly to the people who first imagined this temple of knowledge. You lean against a rough stone wall, listening to the city pulse around you, feeling a sense of calm mixed with wonder. The foundation isn't even fully laid, yet already, in the back of your mind, you sense the quiet gravity of what's to come. You wander through a quieter lane now, away from the relentless market clamor, feeling the sun softening over your shoulders. Ahead, a grand domed house hints at power and ambition. This is Julius Celsus's residence, where vision and vanity intermingle. You can almost hear him pacing inside, sandaled feet scuffing against marble floors, muttering about prestige, posterity, and the odd obsession with being remembered after death. His plan isn't just to build a library, it's to craft a statement of eternal significance, a mausoleum disguised as a temple of knowledge. And yet, while he dreams, life outside the villa carries on in its usual chaos. Chickens pecking at discarded figs, laundry fluttering like flags, a stray dog sniffing your heel. Celsus' ambition is tangible, a kind of magnetic gravity you feel as you approach the site where his library will rise. You imagine the halls lined with scrolls, the smell of papyrus and ink mingling with faint traces of incense. Some historians still argue whether Celsus intended the library primarily as a civic monument or more as a personal mausoleum to cement his legacy. Either way, the dual purpose creates a tension that you can almost feel as you trudge through the city, noticing vendors arguing over the quality of clay and marble tiles, or the cobbler fussing over the stitching of his latest sandals. As you glance over the city rooftops, you spot artisans moving in and out of workshops, each carrying tools and materials. One mason whistling a tune that doesn't quite match the rhythm of his chisel, another laughing at his apprentice for spilling ink on a parchment. These small human moments make the grand vision of Celsus more relatable. You realize that monumental history is always constructed atop layers of mundane life. Even the minor eccentricities matter. The senator's obsession with symmetry, the cook's insistence that honey must be drizzled in precise spirals, or the gardener who whispers to his plants in Greek. You pause near the villa's colonnade, inhaling the scent of warm stone and faintly fermented wine. Conversations drift toward logistics: how many scrolls, what size of chambers, the precise orientation for sunlight to gently illuminate the shelves without bleaching fragile papyrus. And yes, there are whispers about astrology too. Some insist certain days are more auspicious for laying stones, while others scoff, tossing pebbles in frustration. Historians still argue whether these rituals were strictly symbolic or rooted in genuine superstition, but for now, they add a quirky rhythm to daily planning. Walking along a shaded path, you imagine Celsus sketching lines on parchment, quill in hand, while a curious cat jumps onto his table, scattering designs in every direction. You stifle a laugh at the thought: ancient grandeur interrupted by everyday chaos. Yet somehow, these interruptions are exactly what breathe life into history, turning dusty plans into living endeavors. The vision begins to solidify in your mind. A building both functional and ceremonial. A testament to human aspiration and eccentricity. You trudge on, feeling the sun lowering slightly, casting long shadows over the city, and realize that you are now walking not just in space, but in the very pulse of ambition that will eventually shape the Library of Celsus. You follow a narrow street lined with tall, sun-bleached walls, the chatter of vendors fading behind you as the library site comes into view. Builders and planners cluster near rough sketches pinned to wooden posts, gesturing animatedly, shifting stones under the glaring sunday. You feel the tension in the air, a mix of excitement and indecision, as they debate the exact plot where this architectural jewel should stand. Every choice seems monumental. A few steps north or south could determine sunlight angles, wind patterns, even the library's aura of authority over the city. You trudge over loose gravel, imagining the minds of Roman planners churning over details that seem trivial today but will echo through millennia. Animals wander lazily through the site. A goat nibbles at the corner of a marble block, indifferent to centuries of ambition unfolding around it. A cat slinks past, tail flicking, as if it knows something the architects don't. Historians still argue whether the location was chosen for symbolic prominence along the main street or for pragmatic access to trade routes, but to you, the deliberation feels palpably human. You brush your fingertips against rough timber stakes marking corners, feeling the texture of work in progress, the raw intimacy of creation before perfection is imposed. The debates around the site are surprisingly theatrical. One architect insists the library face the rising sun, claiming divine inspiration, while a rival suggests the westward orientation for aesthetic balance against the city's skyline. They gesture passionately, parchment shaking, voices rising just enough for the nearby children to giggle and the merchants to peek from behind cloth canopies. You notice one worker carefully tracing patterns in the dirt, perhaps an early attempt to visualize foundation lines. Oddly, You catch him humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby, as if the stones themselves might sleep easier under music. Nearby, a mason kneels beside a stack of stones, inspecting each for flaws, muttering under his breath about the perfect grain and density. You marvel at the care in such minute scrutiny, remembering the stories of ancient builders who swore by rituals, rubbing stones with oil, whispering names of protective spirits, even leaving tiny, hidden carvings to ward off misfortune. Quirky practices, certainly, but they give colour to the methodical precision of Roman engineering. You breathe in the scent of earth and dust mingling with crushed marble fragments, letting your mind drift to the quiet hum of the city beyond. As you watch, you realize the importance of collaboration and contention in shaping history. Each argument, each decision, each small quirk of human personality will ripple forward into the library's enduring presence. You step back, noticing how light falls across the site, the shadow of a column just beginning to form, hinting at the library's eventual grandeur. Every choice, every debate, even the stray goat nibbling at corners, becomes a thread in the tapestry of creation. You trudge onward, sensing that the library is no longer just a concept in Celsus's mind, it is beginning to live in the dust, stone, and laughter surrounding you. You follow a narrow path toward the stone-laden area, the air thick with dust and the sharp tang of freshly cut marble. Carvers and masons are hauling massive slabs from carts, their muscles taut, sweat glistening under the relentless Anatolian Sunday. You can almost feel the vibration of the city itself, Ephesus alive with commerce, gossip, and the occasional clatter of a dropped tool. As you step closer, you notice the subtle differences in stone, some gleaming pure white, others faintly grey, streaked with veins like frozen rivers. It's intoxicating in its ordinariness, and yet every slab will soon contribute to the enduring elegance of the Library of Celsus. Historians still argue whether all the marble was locally quarried, or if some blocks were imported from distant Anatolian sites, a debate that adds a hint of mystery to each polished surface. You stoop to run a hand over a newly hewn block, feeling rough grooves left by chisels, the tactile memory of labour embedded in stone. There's a minor drama unfolding nearby. A mason argues with a cart driver about the weight of a load, gesticulating wildly while a goat bounces across the path, as if auditioning for a part in the chaos. You almost chuckle but catch yourself, remembering the gentle rhythm of ancient life, punctuated with absurdities like misplaced tools or wandering animals. Transporting materials is an art in itself. Blocks slide along greased wooden rollers, ropes creak under tension, and a few men balance precariously atop a cart, shouting directions as though their voices alone could lift the stone. You notice one mason has carved tiny symbols into each slab, perhaps blessings or private jokes, a quirk you wouldn't find in any modern blueprint. Meanwhile, the scent of fresh lime and crushed marble dust clings to your clothes, mingling oddly with the faint aroma of bread and wine from nearby markets. The city itself seems to breathe through these stones, each one a silent witness to toil, ambition, and the peculiarities of human behaviour. Nearby, artisans chatter about the ideal angles for column placement, some claiming subtle sunlight exposure enhances aesthetic appeal, others insisting symmetry overrides light altogether. You overhear a comment about an ancient superstition, rubbing a block before installation supposedly ensured the structure's longevity. Strange, but it fits perfectly into the rhythm of Ephesus, where practical engineering and ritualistic habit dance side by side. Even in the midst of labour, there's laughter. A young apprentice drops a chisel and ducks before it rolls harmlessly under a cart, prompting a round of teasing from his companions. As you trudge along, you notice the layering of human effort and natural beauty. Marble dust hangs like a soft fog in the golden light, creating fleeting shadows on walls yet to exist. You watch stones lifted, aligned, and settled, imagining them as part of a library that will one day hold thousands of scrolls, while tiny eccentricities like the humming mason or a goat gnawing on marble remind you that history isn't only grand gestures, but also the mundane, intimate, and often whimsical moments that build a legacy stone by stone. You step closer to a makeshift workshop buzzing with activity, where skilled artisans have set up temporary benches, chisels scattered like metallic confetti. The air hums with the rhythmic tapping of hammers against stone, mingling with the faint aroma of resin and sawdust. You notice a sculptor crouched over a slab, carving a delicate relief of a toga-clad philosopher, fingers smudged with dust, lips moving as if reciting an argument from memory. Nearby, another mason hums off-key opera while smoothing a column shaft, and you can't help but smile at how serious grandeur and quirky humanity coexist in this sunlit chaos. Historians still argue whether some of these sculptures were imported from across the empire or crafted on site, but to you, it's the tiny details, the scratch marks, the imperfect symmetry that make the scene alive. You lean against a wall, feeling the vibrations of chisels through the stone, while watching apprentices learn the trade, tracing their fingers along grooves that will, centuries later, define the library's facade. One young boy accidentally chips a corner, and the master sighs, shaking his head, but there's a glint of amusement in his eyes, proof that mistakes, minor as they are, become part of the story. You notice the diversity of craftsmen, some with beards flecked in marble dust, others with calloused hands still bearing ink stains from drafting sketches. One elderly artisan seems almost mystical, pausing to whisper to the stone as if negotiating its willingness to be shaped. Quirky practices like this, murmured blessings or secret symbols hidden within carvings, punctuate the otherwise methodical labor. It reminds you that human hands and eccentricities leave imprints alongside technical skill, a dual legacy of precision and personality. Even as the work progresses, laughter and debate drift through the workshop. A mason argues that a frieze must face east, while a sculptor insists it's meaningless unless aligned with the sun's noon position. Someone mutters about an owl sighting the night before, claiming it's a good omen for creativity, while others roll their eyes but indulge the superstition. You inhale the mix of stone dust and resin, letting your imagination wander into the moment when the first column is hoisted, the first relief unveiled, and the library begins to assert itself against the sky. In a quiet corner, you notice tools that seem ordinary but carry stories. A chisel nicked from decades of use, a mallet with initials carved on the handle, each object whispering its own history. You trace the rough-hewn shapes of early statues and feel a sense of wonder that human effort, patience, and occasional eccentricity can combine to create something monumental. As you wander among the artisans, sensing the pride and playfulness intermingling with serious labor, you realize the Library of Celsus is not just stone and marble, it is a living testament to skill, ambition, and the small, memorable quirks of those who dared to shape eternity with their hands. You step into a sun-dappled courtyard where architects and masons are gathered, the air thick with dust and the murmur of debate. Your eyes are drawn to the columns already half-carved, their fluted shafts gleaming in the afternoon sunday. A serious discussion unfolds. Corinthian versus Ionic. One architect, chalk smudged across his toga, gestures wildly, insisting the ornate Corinthian capitals will give the library unmatched elegance, while another calmly counters that the Ionic's understated charm will better suit the civic purpose. You notice a small goat nibbling at a discarded piece of rope, utterly uninterested in human disputes. Historians still argue whether the final choice of columns reflected aesthetic preference, structural necessity, or simply the whims of Celsus's heirs. The debate carries on, voices rising and falling like waves. You trudge closer, feeling the warmth of sun-baked stone on your legs, and catch glimpses of playful quirks. One mason secretly carving a tiny frog into the base of a column, as if hiding a private joke for future generations. Nearby, apprentices sketch proportions on sand, erasing and redrawing with a patience that borders on meditative. You breathe in the scent of fresh-cut marble and limestone, mingling with faint whiffs of oil used to polish newly smoothed surfaces. Even the arguments themselves have rhythm and cadence, The lead architect slams a palm against a column to emphasize a point, while a sculptor leans lazily, twirling a chisel in hand, suggesting minor adjustments that spark laughter and eye rolls. You notice someone muttering about auspicious days for lifting stone, a superstition entwined seamlessly with practicality. There's a strange harmony here between seriousness and whimsy, a balance that somehow allows monumental decisions to emerge from human unpredictability. You wander along the row of half-finished columns, tracing the grooves with your fingers, imagining how future scholars will marvel at the precision centuries from now. The taller Corinthian capitals soar in your mind. Their carved acanthus leaves almost breathing under your gaze. One historian's note drifts through your imagination. Perhaps the decision wasn't just about style, but about power and influence, the kind that whispers through civic spaces and cements legacies. You almost stumble over a loose stone, a reminder that even in great debates, life carries on. The city hums, animals wander, and minor chaos weaves through human ambition. As the sun tilts lower, shadows stretch across unfinished columns, creating playful silhouettes that dance across sand and stone. You watch the artisans continue their passionate discussions, punctuated with laughter and occasional sarcasm, realizing that the library's grandeur is inseparable from the small, human imperfections that shape its creation. Even the stray goat seems like a participant in this ancient symposium, nibbling thoughtfully as if judging the arguments. In this courtyard, under sun and dust, you understand that monumental architecture is as much about negotiation, eccentricity, and stubborn pride as it is about stone and skill. You stroll along the scaffolding that wraps around partially completed walls, the sun casting crisscrossing shadows over rough-hewn stones. Craftsmen bend over wooden models, chisels tapping in hypnotic rhythm, carving intricate friezes destined to grace the library's facade. You lean closer, noticing the peculiar attention to detail. A small owl etched into a leafy vine, a curious smile on a philosopher's relief, almost as if the artists were sneaking private jokes into the public monument. Historians still argue whether these symbols were purely decorative or imbued with deeper, perhaps ritualistic meaning. You inhale the scent of fresh lime mortar and dusted marble, feeling the faint tingle in your nose from particles suspended in the golden light. The artisans murmur superstitious phrases as they work, some dipping chisels into special oils to encourage the stone to cooperate, others whispering blessings to avert cracks. You notice a mason humming a tune that sounds eerily like a lullaby, though it's out of sync with the steady rhythm of hammering. Small moments like these remind you that behind every monumental project lies the peculiar personality of those shaping it, eccentricities, mingling seamlessly with skill. Occasionally, someone leans back, wiping sweat from their brow, and laughs at a crooked line or an apprentice's miscalculation. Across the facade, friezes begin to tell a story. Philosophers deep in discussion, scrolls stacked precariously, gods and mortals interwoven in delicate relief. You imagine the debates over each curve and angle, arguments echoing over scaffolds, the kind of scholarly bickering that leaves subtle fingerprints on history. A mason steps aside to admire his own work, muttering, "Not bad for a day's toil," while an apprentice watches, notebook in hand, sketching notes and tiny doodles. You can almost hear future historians puzzling over these quirks, debating whether the minor asymmetries were mistakes, artistic license, or hidden messages. Meanwhile, life around the site continues unabated. A stray cat winds through beams, a merchant's cart rattles past, and someone's dropped hammer clatters against stone, sending a cascade of tiny sparks of dust into the sunlit air. You realize that while the library's construction is grand in ambition, it is stitched together with moments of whimsy, improvisation, and small human errors that somehow make the building more alive than perfection ever could. Even the faint aroma of roasting meat from a nearby stall seems to mingle with the scent of stone, linking everyday life to monumental creation. As you watch the friezes take shape, each carved detail sharp against the sunlight, you feel a sense of quiet awe. The blend of careful craftsmanship, eccentric habit, and minute debates forms the heartbeat of the library, a rhythm that will echo centuries later. Every carved vine, every hidden owl, every crooked line contributes to a story both grand and intimately human, reminding you that history is not merely about achievements, but about the people quirky, flawed, and brilliant, who bring them to life. You duck under a low scaffolding beam, brushing dust from your shoulders, and step into the partially enclosed interior where wooden models and sketches are spread across rough tables. The air is heavy with the scent of sawdust and ink, and you notice scribes meticulously planning the placement of scrolls, their quills dancing across wax tablets in loops and precise marks. You can almost hear their soft whispers debating order alphabetical, by subject, or perhaps according to the perceived wisdom of each author. Historians still argue whether the ancient librarians prioritized accessibility or symbolism, but right now, it's the tactile engagement that captivates you. Fingers tracing lines, hands guiding ink, the quiet murmur of human thought made tangible. The scribe's habits are quirky in ways that make you smile. One insists on dipping his quill in water sourced from a specific spring, claiming it improves legibility. Another wears a tiny bell on his wrist to announce when he enters a room, a habit that seems unnecessary, yet oddly charming. You watch an apprentice accidentally knock over a jar of ink, sending a tiny wave across a wooden tablet, and can't help but chuckle at the gentle chaos. Meanwhile, the scent of beeswax from ceiling scrolls blends with marble dust, drifting through open windows, creating an oddly comforting aroma, a mixture of the mundane and the monumental. The architectural planning is equally fascinating. Wooden models of shelves, alcoves, and reading spaces stand like miniature cities. You trace your fingers along a scale column, imagining the eventual weight of stone and knowledge pressing down. Some sketches have annotations in the margins, reminders about light angles, humidity control, or the thickness of shelves. A scribe whispers to himself about the perfect amount of sun, as if the scrolls themselves might wilt or brighten depending on careful measurement. Small debates arise about whether certain alcoves should face east or west, balancing illumination and temperature, and you hear someone muttering about the auspicious timing of moving scrolls, a superstition that seems to coexist seamlessly with architectural precision. Every corner holds eccentricities. You notice a small hidden alcove intended for private reflection, perhaps for Celsus himself or the chief librarian, and wonder what sort of conversations or silent musings might occur there centuries from now. A tiny bird slips through an open window, startling an apprentice, and you pause to admire the interplay between human order and natural whimsy. The interior planning is not just functional, it is imbued with personality, rhythm, and occasional absurdity, a reminder that monumental ambition often rides on the shoulders of ordinary human quirks. You wander further, tracing paths through models and sketches, imagining the scent of fresh scrolls, the warmth of sun on polished marble floors, and the soft murmur of scholars consulting texts. You realize that the library is already alive, not in its completed stone, but in the living, breathing intent of those shaping it. Every scribble, every whispered superstition, every minor spill of ink forms a delicate, almost imperceptible thread, weaving together practicality, eccentricity, and enduring human curiosity. The Library of Celsus, in this embryonic state, is as much about human imagination as it is about architecture. You step back into the sunlight, leaving the scent-heavy interior behind, and wander toward the gathering of wealthy patrons and local officials. The air hums with tension, a mix of civility and quiet ambition, as funds are allocated and political influence subtly exercised. You trudge over gravel, feeling the warmth of the late afternoon sun on your back, and notice the small gestures that make the scene oddly human. A senator tugging at his toga nervously, a merchant quietly counting coins, a child tugging at a parent's hem, wide-eyed at the spectacle. Historians still argue whether patronage for the library was driven by civic pride or the desire for personal legacy. But in this moment, you witness both threads intertwined. Conversations weave through the crowd, sometimes cordial, sometimes barely restrained debates. One patron insists on donating a set of imported scrolls. Another hints at contributing funds only if a niche will carry his family crest. You notice a quirk in one donor's behavior. He fidgets with a tiny bronze figurine in his palm, claiming it brings luck for negotiations. Nearby, a clerk jots notes, eyebrows furrowed, capturing every offer, every stipulation, as though recording the subtle choreography of power. You inhale the faint aroma of ink, wax, and slightly overcooked bread from a nearby stall, mingling in a scent that is both domestic and monumental. The politics of funding extend into whispered gossip and sly negotiations. One official murmurs that another intends to redirect funds toward a more personal monument. A few others chuckle, shaking their heads at both the audacity and cunning on display. You step closer to overhear them debating the timing of stone deliveries, the sequence of construction, and minor bribes disguised as ceremonial gifts. It's oddly theatrical, like watching an intricately choreographed dance where every gesture carries significance, yet with room for mischief, humor, and small human absurdities. Even amidst the tension, life around the library continues its eccentric rhythm. Goats wander near the edge of the courtyard, nibbling at discarded rope, while pigeons flutter between columns, indifferent to contracts and coins. You notice the subtle layering of urban life, the faint squeak of a cartwheel, the laughter of apprentices testing their strength on heavy beams, the occasional bark of a dog asserting its territorial presence. This hum of ordinary life punctuates the high-stakes discussions, reminding you that history isn't composed solely of monumental acts, but of the interplay between human ambition and the day-to-day quirks that make life unpredictable. As you watch patrons gesture, debate, and sign agreements, you realize that the Library of Celsus owes its existence not only to stone and skill, but to human idiosyncrasy, political maneuvering, and occasional whimsy. Every coin, every whispered suggestion, every eccentric habit like the bronze figurine or the child tugging at a senator's toga, threads itself into the library's foundation. And in that realization, you feel the full weight of history, monumental yet deeply human, meticulously planned yet unpredictably alive, a tapestry woven from ambition, curiosity, and the charming chaos of everyday life. You step onto the uneven ground near the skeleton of the library, where scaffolding stretches skyward, and the rhythmic clatter of construction fills the air. Workers haul beams, lift stone blocks, and adjust pulley systems with precision and occasional grumbles. You trudge carefully between piles of marble dust, feeling the warmth of the sun on your shoulders, and the vibration of hammer strikes through the soles of your sandals. It's easy to imagine the sheer exhaustion, sweat dripping from brows, and the minor mishaps that inevitably punctuate such a massive undertaking. Historians still argue the exact timeline of construction, but the challenges you observe seem timeless. Logistics, labor, and the occasional wayward goat disrupting a carefully aligned column. A mason curses softly under his breath as a mislaid block threatens to roll away, while a young apprentice dives to steady it, heart racing. Nearby, a rope snaps under strain, sending a small cascade of dust into the air, causing a collective groan and a moment of laughter. You notice the unusual habit of one builder who keeps a tiny amulet tucked under his arm, muttering to it before lifting heavy stones, a superstitious quirk that contrasts with the otherwise methodical effort. The scent of warm stone mingles with fresh-cut timber and traces of crushed herbs used by some artisans to soothe aching muscles. A surprisingly aromatic symphony of construction life. Despite the meticulous planning, minor accidents abound. A column tilts slightly before it is steadied. Scaffolding creaks under uneven weight. A cartwheel wobbles as it crosses rough terrain. Each mishap brings a flurry of voices, instructions shouted and gestures flung, followed by laughter, sighs, and the slow resumption of work. You catch a glimpse of a mason tracing a decorative motif onto a slab with chalk, then stepping back to admire a misaligned line he decides to keep because it adds character. It's in these small, human imperfections that the library's life begins to emerge. You wander between workers, noticing tiny rituals, a hammer tapped 3 times against stone before lifting, a whispered phrase before moving a particularly heavy slab. Historians still argue whether these rituals were rooted in superstition, practical timing, or simple habit, but they reveal the human layer underpinning monumental construction. The air vibrates with determination, debate, and occasional humor. Someone slips a small figurine into the corner of a column's base, unseen by others, perhaps for luck, perhaps as a joke, a whimsical imprint destined to remain invisible for centuries. As the day wanes, the scaffolds cast long shadows, softening the harsh angles of the stone, and the rhythm of labor slows. You pause to watch, feeling the cadence of sweat, muscle, and careful planning converge into tangible form. Every minor accident, every whispered superstition, every quirky habit and improvisation blends seamlessly with skill, creating a structure that is both precise and profoundly human. The Library of Celsus is no longer an idea or sketch, it is beginning to breathe in the dust, sweat, and laughter of those shaping it, a living monument to ambition, craft, and the unpredictable poetry of everyday effort. You wander to the eastern facade, where scaffolds rise like a temporary forest, and sunlight glances off partially finished columns, casting intricate shadows on the dusty ground. The air smells faintly of limestone and oil, mingling with the aroma of roasting chestnuts from a nearby vendor. You trudge past a mason carefully measuring a column base, quill tucked behind his ear, muttering to himself about symmetry and divine favor. Historians still argue whether these precise measurements were purely practical or part of a ritualized obsession with perfection, but watching him work, it's easy to see both at play. Nearby, a sculptor crouches over a marble relief, chisel tapping softly, carving a philosopher in flowing robes whose gaze seems almost alive. You notice the subtle humor hidden in his work, a tiny, mischievous smile carved into the corner of a scroll, a playful nod to future observers. Children peek through the scaffolding, wide-eyed, as if witnessing magic in the making, and you almost trip over a bundle of rope left carelessly in the dust, laughing quietly at the chaos that underpins such grandeur. Debates echo across the courtyard. A young apprentice argues that the columns should be slightly taller for aesthetic balance, while a senior mason insists the height must follow ancient proportion rules. Their voices rise and fall, punctuated by the occasional whistle or groan, creating a rhythm that's almost musical. You notice a quirky habit. The lead mason touches a column with a small brush dipped in oil before approving placement, muttering an old phrase meant to ensure stability. Even in these details, you see the intersection of craft, superstition, and human personality that defines the library's creation. The eastern facade is alive not just with stone but with human eccentricity. A goat meanders past, sniffing at a discarded hammer, while a pigeon hops along a ledge, startling a mason who swats gently at it before returning to his work. You watch the sun inch lower, glinting off polished surfaces, highlighting fine grooves in the marble, the result of hundreds of hours of meticulous labor. Historians still argue about the choice of decorative motifs, whether the scrolls and figures were meant to glorify learning, commemorate the dead, or simply demonstrate the artisan's skill. But here in the moment, it feels like all three purposes coexist harmoniously. As you trace the lines of newly erected columns with your eyes, you realize that construction is as much choreography as it is engineering. The placement of each stone, the careful alignment of friezes, the rhythm of chisels and hammers, and even the scattered quirks, the humming, the hidden figurines, the wandering animals coalesce into something almost alive. You pause to take in the facade, imagining the shadows shifting over scrolls and statues as the sun travels, feeling the delicate balance between monumental ambition and human whimsy. and sensing that the Library of Celsus is slowly but surely stepping into its destined immortality. You climb a narrow wooden ladder that creaks under your weight, leading to the upper scaffolding where the library's roof and pediment are beginning to take shape. The sun is lower now, casting long golden slashes across dust-laden air. You trudge carefully along a plank, balancing amidst hammers, chisels, and bundles of rope, aware that one misstep could send you tumbling. A mason beside you hums a tune that doesn't quite match the rhythm of the hammering, a small rebellion against the otherwise strict cadence of work. Historians still argue whether the pediment's final design was influenced more by aesthetic trends or religious symbolism, but standing here, you feel the tension between beauty and meaning in every carved detail. Looking down, you see workers coordinating the lifting of stone blocks, ropes straining against pulleys as laughter and shouted instructions mingle. You notice a small quirk. A mason keeps a tiny clay figurine tucked into his belt for luck, whispering encouragement each time he steadies a beam. Nearby, an apprentice accidentally tips over a bucket of water, creating a miniature flood along the planks. The group pauses, someone cracks a joke, and the work resumes with gentle chuckles. You inhale the scents of warm stone, resin, and the faint tang of ink from the architect's sketches, a sensory mix that somehow calms despite the height and precariousness. As the upper structure rises, the artisans debate the exact curvature of the pediment and the alignment of decorative reliefs. One insists that a slight tilt will catch sunlight at noon just right. Another scoffs, claiming it will look better facing the afternoon shadows. You trace your fingers along a carefully carved scroll motif, noting tiny imperfections left intentionally, perhaps to humanize the otherwise perfect symmetry. Even these small eccentricities, from humming to whispered superstitions, add character to a structure meant to convey immortality. Pigeons coo lazily along the beams, indifferent to human toil, while a stray dog patrols the courtyard below, barking at any sudden movement. You feel a gentle thrill watching blocks hoisted into place, realizing that each stone carries not only weight but the imprint of hundreds of hands, intentions, and small quirks, rituals, jokes, and personal flourishes that make the library more than architecture. Historians still debate the degree to which these individual personalities influence the final result, but it's clear to you that without this human touch, the library would have been a sterile monument, not a vibrant testament to collective effort. As shadows lengthen across the scaffolding, you pause to consider the view. A city bustling around a growing monument, sun striking marble columns and reliefs, dust dancing in golden light. You feel the rhythm of labor, the quirks and traditions, the occasional chaos of animals and humans intertwining, all coming together to shape a structure destined to outlive its creators. In this delicate balance between skill, eccentricity, and ambition, the Library of Celsus begins to transcend its materials, hinting at the timeless life it will inherit in centuries to come. You descend carefully from the scaffolding, brushing dust from your tunic, and find yourself amid a cluster of artisans finishing the intricate details of the library's facade. The golden afternoon sun casts long shadows, highlighting the deep grooves and delicate curves of Corinthian capitals. You trudge over scattered chips of marble, inhaling the mingled scents of stone, resin, and faint incense from a nearby altar. A sculptor leans over a partially completed relief, whispering to himself about proportions and divine inspiration, while an apprentice mimics his movements with exaggerated precision, prompting stifled laughter. Historians still argue whether these subtle deviations were accidental, deliberate, or infused with symbolic meaning. But in the moment, it adds a human rhythm to monumental craft. Nearby, builders discuss the alignment of the library's niches, debating how best to display scrolls while allowing sunlight to illuminate without bleaching fragile papyrus. You notice one mason's habit of tapping each column thrice before declaring it stable, a small superstition, but one that brings a rhythm and comfort to otherwise exacting labor. A stray cat winds through the courtyard, brushing against legs and occasionally startling a young apprentice who jumps back, earning amused glances from the seasoned workers. It's a small, charming chaos against the backdrop of meticulous architectural planning. As you move closer, you see that every detail carries a story. A frieze depicts philosophers in discussion, their gestures exaggerated just enough to suggest personality, while a hidden figure, a tiny owl, peeks out from behind carved vines, likely unnoticed by most. You imagine future historians debating its purpose, wondering whether it was symbolic, humorous, or a private signature of the artist. Nearby, someone hums a low tune while chiseling, the rhythm uniting the disparate sounds of hammers, laughter, and whispered debate into a quiet, cohesive symphony. Even the mundane tasks are steeped in ritual and eccentricity. A mason brushes dust from each surface with a specific kind of cloth, muttering a phrase that supposedly ensures smooth installation. Pigeons hop along the beams above, occasionally cooing in response, and a child peers through a gate, eyes wide with curiosity. You trudge through these human moments, feeling the pulse of labor, skill, and idiosyncrasy that is slowly giving shape to the library. Historians still debate whether Celsus intended the building as a civic statement, a personal tomb, or a blend of both, but observing the artisans, you realize the structure embodies all these purposes, intertwined with small quirks and humor that make it come alive. As sunlight dips lower, long shadows stretch across the completed and partially completed carvings, highlighting both grandeur and minor imperfections. You pause, sensing the harmony of chaos and order, ritual and practicality, as human effort, eccentricity, and artistry converge to create a structure that is both monumental and intimately alive. The Library of Celsus is no longer just stone and ambition. It is a living testament to creativity, human idiosyncrasy, and the subtle poetry hidden in laborious devotion. You wander through the library courtyard as the sun begins its slow descent, casting warm, golden light across partially completed structures. Dust hangs lazily in the air, illuminated like tiny stars, and you notice the rhythmic sound of hammers and chisels fading slightly as workers take brief pauses. You trudge past stacks of marble and timber, the faint scent of oil, crushed stone, and distant baking bread mingling pleasantly. A mason wipes sweat from his brow with a sooty cloth, muttering about the stubbornness of a particular column. Historians still argue whether the original artisans prioritized aesthetics over structural efficiency, but witnessing their meticulous care, it's clear that both mattered, often simultaneously. Nearby, sculptors and apprentices discuss the final touches on decorative reliefs. One insists a vine motif must curve slightly differently. Another jokes that the philosopher's beard is too wild, earning soft laughter from colleagues. You notice a quirky habit. A young apprentice gently taps each carved figure with his knuckle before the master inspects it, claiming it awakens the stone. Birds flutter through open windows, occasionally startling a cat that scurries underfoot, creating moments of unplanned amusement. These small human touches, superstitions, jokes, accidents interweave with precise skill to form the living heartbeat of the project. Across the courtyard, patrons and city officials linger, occasionally consulting blueprints or gesturing about structural concerns. One whispers about the timing of the final column placement. Another insists a hidden niche should face a particular street for symbolic resonance. You trudge past, noting how personal ambition and civic pride merge in subtle negotiations, punctuated by laughter and gentle sarcasm. Even in matters of power and funding, human quirks shine through. A bronze figurine clutched for luck, a whispered superstition, a child mimicking adult gestures, all part of the ongoing choreography of creation. The library's exterior begins to assert its character as columns rise, friezes emerge, and niches take form. You notice the interplay of light and shadow across the marble, the deliberate angles meant to catch sunlight at specific hours, and the tiny imperfections left intentionally to humanize the otherwise monumental structure. Historians still debate whether these flaws were symbolic or purely artistic. but they add warmth to the stone, echoing the humanity that crafted it. You watch an apprentice step back, nodding proudly at a perfectly carved relief, while a mason adjusts a beam with precision and quiet satisfaction. As shadows lengthen, the courtyard fills with a gentle calm. You sense the rhythm of completion, labor slowing, laughter softening, subtle rituals punctuating final touches. Every small eccentricity, the humming, the tapping, the whispered superstitions, and wandering animals converges with skill and ambition, creating a structure both grand and intimately alive. You realize that the Library of Celsus, while nearing completion, is more than a building. It is a living mosaic of human effort, idiosyncrasy, and artistry, destined to endure far beyond the fleeting moments of its creation. You step back to take in the full panorama of the Library of Celsus as the evening sun casts a soft, amber glow over its emerging grandeur. Dust motes drift lazily in the air, catching the light like tiny suspended stars, and you trudge carefully over the uneven ground, savoring the subtle warmth of the stone beneath your sandals. The columns stand tall, fluted, and elegant, while carved friezes whisper stories of philosophers, deities, and hidden little jokes left by artisans for posterity. Historians still argue whether these tiny carvings were intentional symbols or the artist's playful eccentricities, but to you, they add a charming human heartbeat to a monumental edifice. Artisans move with a mixture of fatigue and quiet pride, cleaning, polishing, and performing final touches. You notice one mason tapping a column gently with a mallet, murmuring a ritual phrase before inspecting the alignment, a habit repeated countless times throughout construction. Nearby, an apprentice hums softly while tracing the curves of a carved scroll, and a stray cat slinks through the courtyard, weaving between stone blocks with nonchalance. The faint aroma of warm marble, crushed herbs, and lingering incense mingles in the twilight air, creating a sensory memory you will carry long after the workday ends. City officials and patrons linger at the edges, some whispering about the library's symbolic significance, others marveling openly at the delicate beauty of the carvings. A child tugs at a parent's toga, pointing excitedly at an owl hidden in a frieze. The parent chuckles, shaking their head. You realize that even in the midst of monumental ambition, these small human moments, laughter, curiosity, superstition, tiny mistakes, have shaped the project as much as chisels and marble ever could. Historians still debate whether Celsus intended the building as a tomb, a civic library, or both, but the living essence of the place feels equally bound to human imagination, effort, and whimsy. As shadows lengthen and the evening hum settles, you watch workers and patrons alike step back, taking a quiet breath in appreciation. The library, nearly complete, seems to pulse with the combined rhythm of countless hands, minor mishaps, whispered superstitions, and eccentric habits. A pigeon flutters down a column, startling a mason who chuckles before returning to his task. You trudge slowly across the courtyard, absorbing the grandeur, the minor chaos, and the delicate interplay of human skill and idiosyncrasy. The Library of Celsus stands now as both achievement and living testament, a structure shaped by ambition, curiosity, laughter, ritual, and small quirks, destined to endure long after its builders have vanished. You pause, feeling the dust on your skin, the warmth of stone, the fading sun painting every curve and relief, and sense the heartbeat of centuries yet to come. The echoes of hammers, whispers, and laughter linger, a reminder that even monumental history is stitched together from the quiet, whimsical, and profoundly human moments that compose daily life. Now, the day softens, the sun melting into a gentle haze, and you find yourself sitting on a cool stone step, dust clinging lightly to your clothes. The city around you hums quietly, as if exhaling after the day's toil, and even the stray animals have settled into the calm rhythm of evening. You can feel the warmth lingering in the marble, the scent of crushed stone and faint resin still drifting in the air, mingling with distant aromas of bread and herbs. Every detail, the delicate carvings, the small imperfections, the whispered rituals of the artisans seems to settle into place, creating a soothing symmetry that both your mind and body can rest upon. You trace your gaze along the columns, imagining the hands that shaped them, the minor accidents, the secret symbols, the humming and whispered superstitions that made the library alive long before it housed scrolls. The shadows lengthen, softening edges, and the interplay of light and stone becomes almost hypnotic, inviting a deep, slow exhale. You notice the tiny quirks, the owl hidden in a frieze, the stray goat, the playful chatter of apprentices, and let them remind you that human endeavor, even monumental, carries gentle imperfections that make it approachable, intimate, and oddly comforting. As evening folds into night, the library stands quietly, its story woven from ambition, creativity, and the tender eccentricities of its builders. You feel your eyelids growing heavy, carried by the rhythm of labor, laughter, and quiet triumph, imagining the gentle echo of chisels, the murmur of debates, and the soft footfalls of the city winding down. The Library of Celsus is not just stone, it is a living mosaic of human effort, patience, and curiosity. Let yourself drift with it now, letting the calm cadence of history cradle your mind, knowing that even monumental achievements are built from small, delicate, and profoundly human moments.